The ROV's beam cuts through suspended particles, revealing a shape that shouldn't exist at this depth. Steel plating emerges from the trench wall, covered in rust but structurally intact. The conning tower stands upright, its anti-aircraft mounting still visible through layers of marine growth. This is a Type VII U-Boat, the most produced submarine in German naval history, and it has been resting here undisturbed since 1943. The trench kept it hidden from surface surveys for 8 decades. At 180 meters, the pressure in cold water slowed decomposition to a crawl. The submarine sits at a 15-degree angle, bow pointing deeper into the canyon. No external damage visible from torpedo strikes or depth charges. The hull appears deliberately positioned, as if the crew chose this spot in their final moments. The hatch opens into the Zentral with minimal resistance. Seawater filled the interior long ago, but the pressure equalization preserved what corrosion would have destroyed in shallower depths. The periscope column rises through the center of the compartment, its brass fittings green with patina but intact. 2 attack periscopes, standard for Type VII variants built after 1941. The depth gauge reads 80 meters, frozen at the submarine's final dive depth before settling here. The Papenburg gauge beside it, used for measuring trim, shows a slight bow-down angle. These instruments tell a story. The crew was attempting a controlled descent when something changed their trajectory. The diving plane indicators point to full dive, maximum angle, not the setting for a routine patrol depth. The hydrophone station occupies the forward starboard corner. Headphones still hang from their mount, cables trailing into the dark water. The operator's seat remains fixed in position, leather cracked but recognizable. This man listened for propeller sounds, for the distinctive ping of ASDIC sonar, for any indication that Allied destroyers had located them. The silence he sought became permanent. Chart fragments remain clipped to the navigation table. The pencil lines have faded, but the grid coordinates are legible under the dive light. These markings place the submarine roughly 200 kilometers from its recorded last position, according to Kriegsmarine radio logs. The discrepancy suggests the captain either received new orders or made an independent decision to alter course. Engine telegraph stands at stop. The brass handle, oxidized but clear, indicates the last command sent to the diesel room. The crew wasn't running when they went down. They were drifting, possibly attempting to remain undetected, possibly dealing with a mechanical failure that made noise dangerous. The commander's quarters occupy a space barely larger than a closet. The fold-down desk holds a leather-bound logbook, its pages swollen with seawater, but still pressed together by the weight of the ocean. Careful documentation shows the log was maintained until at least 2 days before the submarine's disappearance from radio contact. A metal dispatch case lies open on the bunk. Inside, a collection of Enigma-encoded messages on water-resistant paper. The 3-rotor encryption device itself sits in the radio room, rotors still in position. These codes have been photographed, but not decoded on site. Intelligence historians will spend months reconstructing what orders this boat received in its final week of operation. One document stands out, a typed directive on official Kriegsmarine letterhead dated April 1943. The visible portions reference special cargo and rendezvous coordinates. Type VII submarines occasionally carried critical supplies to isolated German outposts or transported high-value personnel attempting to escape Allied advances. This boat may have been engaged in something beyond standard patrol operations. The captain's personal effects remain in a small locker, a photograph of a woman and 2 children, a pocket watch stopped at 4:47, an iron cross medal wrapped in cloth. The watch's hands suggest either the moment of sinking or the moment seawater penetrated this compartment. Without additional evidence, the timestamp remains a reference point, not a conclusion. Maps stored in waterproof tubes show coastal outlines of northern Africa and southern Europe. Route markings indicate previous patrols in the Mediterranean convoy lanes. Red pencil annotations note fuel consumption rates and maximum range calculations. The crew was tracking something, planning for an operation that required precise navigation over long distances. The forward torpedo room doubles as sleeping quarters for the youngest crew members. Bunks stack 3 high between the torpedo tubes, each space barely wider than a man's shoulders. Wool blankets, preserved by the cold and lack of oxygen, still cover thin mattresses. Personal items fill the narrow gaps. A harmonica wedged between pipes, a deck of cards scattered across a small table, letters in wax paper envelopes stored in metal tins. One letter, written in careful script, remains partially legible. The envelope is addressed to Hamburg. The date reads February 1943, 2 months before the submarine's disappearance. It was never sent. Mail typically left the boat during resupply meetings with surface vessels or when submarines returned to occupied French ports. This crew never made it back. The aft compartment, reserved for senior enlisted men, shows signs of more established routine. One sailor carved initials into the wooden support beam above his bunk, a violation of regulations but common practice on long deployments. Another kept a small notebook filled with pencil sketches, faces of crewmates, the view through the periscope, a harbor scene that might be Lorient or La Rochelle. Metal lockers contain uniforms still folded, boots lined up beneath bunks, shaving kits with straight razors and soap tins. The mundane details of 50 men living in a steel tube 67 meters long and 6 meters wide. Every centimeter of space served a purpose. Storage nets hang from the overhead, stuffed with extra clothing and personal supplies. The smell is long gone, but the cramped reality remains evident. A chess set sits on a fold-down table, pieces glued to the board to prevent them from sliding during maneuvers. The game is mid-play, black positioned for an aggressive attack, white defending. Someone's turn was interrupted and never resumed. Small frozen moments like this appear throughout the compartments, fragments of ordinary life ending without warning. The bow compartment holds 4 torpedo tubes, each sealed with its bronze cap still secured. The loading tracks show 1 torpedo in position, ready for firing. 3 additional torpedoes rest in their storage racks overhead. Type G7E electric torpedoes, identifiable by their battery compartments and lack of compressed air systems. These weapons left no surface wake, making them ideal for submerged attacks against alert convoy escorts. The serial numbers, stamped into the torpedo casings, indicate manufacture dates in late 1942. The weapons are relatively new for a submarine lost in 1943. The absence of fired tubes suggests the boat never engaged a target in its final mission. If the crew detected a threat, they either chose not to fire or never had the opportunity. The torpedo calculator, a mechanical computer used to determine firing angles and lead times, sits on its mounting bracket. Settings remain visible through the corrosion. Target speed estimated at 12 knots, range 800 meters, course angle 45 degrees. Someone was preparing for an attack run. The data was entered, but the firing sequence never completed. Compressed air flasks line the bulkhead, used to expel torpedoes from the tubes. Pressure gauges show partial depletion, consistent with normal operations and trim adjustments. Nothing indicates catastrophic mechanical failure. The torpedo room remains combat ready, frozen at the moment when readiness no longer mattered. A maintenance log hangs from a chain near the forward hatch. Entries document routine checks, minor repairs, tube seal inspections. The last entry, dated 3 days before the submarine disappeared from Allied tracking, notes a successful test firing during submerged exercises. The weapons system was functional. The diesel compartment stretches nearly a third of the submarine's length. Twin 6-cylinder engines, each capable of 1,400 horsepower, sit silent and cold. These machines propelled the boat at 17 knots on the surface, allowing it to chase convoys and outrun slower escort vessels. Submerged, the crew switched to electric motors, trading speed for stealth. The engineering log, kept near the throttle controls, shows fuel consumption tracking and engine hour totals. The calculations indicate the submarine had traveled roughly 6,000 kilometers from its last recorded port, likely one of the French Atlantic bases. Fuel remaining would have allowed another 2,000 kilometers of surface travel, or several weeks of submerged patrol operations. No evidence of depth charge damage appears on the engine mounts or hull plating. Depth charges typically rupture welds, crack castings, or bend structural supports. The engines show normal wear, consistent with months of operation, but not catastrophic failure. The cooling systems remain intact, pipes and valves still connected. The electric motor room, separated by a watertight door, houses the 2 batteries that powered submerged operations. Each battery bank contains 62 cells, capable of driving the submarine at 7 knots underwater for brief periods, or 4 knots for extended patrols. The battery casings show no swelling or rupture, ruling out the internal explosion that occasionally destroyed submarines from within. Tool racks hold wrenches, hammers, and specialized equipment for field repairs. Everything remains organized, suggesting the engineering crew maintained discipline until the end. A grease-stained manual lies open on a workbench, pages marked with handwritten notes about valve timing adjustments. The engineers were keeping the boat running. The submarine's position tells the final part of the story. The trench descends another 80 meters below the boat's resting depth. If the crew lost control completely, the submarine would have continued sliding downward until the pressure hull collapsed. Instead, it stopped at a depth the Type VII design could survive, suggesting the crew executed a controlled crash dive to reach the canyon floor. The external ballast tanks show intentional flooding patterns. The forward tanks emptied faster than the aft tanks, creating the bow-down angle visible on the control room gauges. This matches emergency procedures for reaching maximum depth quickly, a tactic used when destroyers closed in with sonar contact. The crew dove deep and sought the thermal layers and geological features that could mask their acoustic signature. No debris field surrounds the wreck. A submarine destroyed by depth charges breaks apart, scattering equipment and hull sections across the seabed. This boat came to rest in one piece, settling into the soft sediment with minimal impact damage. The descent was deliberate, not catastrophic. The historical record shows no Allied attack reports matching this location and time frame. German naval archives list the submarine as missing, presumed lost, but never confirmed destroyed. The boat simply stopped transmitting and never arrived at its destination. For 80 years, it existed in that administrative void where loss is certain, but explanation is absent. Recent analysis of the encoded messages suggests the submarine may have been attempting to reach a clandestine resupply point or evacuate personnel from a collapsing front. Several U-boats received similar orders in 1943 as Allied forces tightened control over the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Some missions succeeded. Others, like this one, vanished. The trench protected the wreck from fishing nets and salvage operations. The depth kept recreational divers away. The cold water and low oxygen environment prevented rapid decay. What remains is not a museum piece, but a sealed time capsule, showing how 50 men lived, worked, and vanished inside a steel cylinder designed for war. The documentation from this dive will add one more data point to the larger story of the Battle of the Atlantic. 783 U-boats lost, 30,000 German submariners killed, and dozens still unaccounted for. This crew is no longer missing. Their boat has been found, their final moments partially reconstructed. The ocean kept them classified until the technology existed to reach this depth and document what silence has protected for 8 decades.